The snowbound silence. The first snow fell like a warning. Thick, heavy flakes that swallowed sound and blurred the edges of the world, drifting across the farmlands of southeastern Ohio, until even the roads disappeared under its weight. By mid-January of 1834, the landscape around Sacred Heart Convent was a graveyard of silence, every tree burdened with ice, every roof groaning under frozen weight. The convent itself, an austere two-story brick building crowned with a weather-worn bell tower, stood against the white expanse like a sentinel. But inside its walls, something had begun to unravel. When Sister Mary Catherine failed to rise for prayers on the morning of January 15th, her absence seemed like a small irregularity, the kind any community might dismiss. But irregularities have a way of compounding. Within hours, what had once felt like a fortress of faith would begin to resemble a waiting tomb. And by the time the first body was carried down into the snow, the convent had already sealed its fate. It began quietly, in a single, narrow dormitory cell on the second floor. The young nun was found lying on her cot, her hands folded neatly around a wooden rosary. No sign of struggle, no fever sweat, no last gasp frozen in her throat. Instead, her lips carried the faintest smile, as though she had been promised something too beautiful to resist. The silence in the room was so profound that Mother Superior Catherine Brennan, hardened by years of leadership, felt her chest tighten. Not with grief alone, but with a kind of premonition. Dr. Samuel Hartwell, summoned from the nearby town of Millbrook, made the treacherous ride through waist-deep snow to examine the body. He was a man of reason, a physician who trusted pulse, breath, and bone more than he trusted prayers or holy water. Yet when he finished his examination, his face bore the pallor of someone who had stumbled into a truth that no science could explain. She died in perfect health, he wrote later, in his journal. No poison, no disease, no flaw of the body, simply absence. The sisters buried Mary Catherine 2 days later in the convent cemetery, a narrow stretch of frozen ground behind the chapel. As their voices rose in hymns, flakes of snow melted against their veils and froze again like glassy tears. Some whispered that she looked more peaceful in death than she had in life. One sister, Mary Elizabeth, even confessed envy of her. A dangerous word, but in that place of ice and silence, envy took root like frost creeping through a cracked window. On the morning of January 18th, another bed was found cold, another body lay smiling, and by then, Sacred Heart was no longer a place of prayer. It was a clock, ticking down toward something no one could stop. The convent had stood for 13 years by then, built in 1821 to serve the German and Irish Catholics who had followed the canal westward. Its land stretched across 47 acres of fields and woods, though in winter it might as well have been an island. The nearest neighbor lived 3 miles away, and the road to Millbrook became an impassable white maze once the drifts piled high. This isolation, once a holy shield, now pressed against the sisters like invisible hands tightening around their throats. They followed their routine with mechanical devotion, rising at 4 for prayers, laboring in the kitchen or classrooms by day, retiring to silence by night. But the rhythm no longer felt like worship. It felt like ritual in the darkest sense of the word, like steps in a dance they hadn't chosen, guided by a hand they couldn't see. Sister Mary Agnes, the convent's recorder, sensed it first. She kept meticulous notes of the days, weather, prayers, tasks, but her handwriting shifted after the first death. What began in neat, tight script grew erratic, trembling. Some words were scratched out, others stained with what looked like tears. In her entries, she began to speak of a heaviness in the air, a stillness in the halls that made the hair rise on her arms. She noted how the sisters' conversations turned more frequently to death, not with fear, but with longing. They whispered of peace. They dreamed of angels. They began to gaze toward the cemetery as though it were home. Dr. Hartwell returned when Mary Elizabeth died. He trudged through drifts so high his horse nearly collapsed, frost turning his breath into clouds of smoke. His second examination yielded the same impossible verdict. Another woman in perfect health gone without cause. His notes that night were more frantic than clinical. They appear to choose death, as if their hearts obey a call I cannot hear. But worse than what he found was what he felt. When he walked through the convent halls, he saw faces pale as wax, eyes distant as if fixed on visions beyond his sight. The sisters greeted him with soft smiles, voices hushed as though they were speaking to unseen companions. When he pressed them with questions, they answered not with symptoms but with scripture, telling him they were chosen. And outside, the snow kept falling. By the third death, Mother Superior Brennan called for nightly prayers, believing the convent was under spiritual attack. The sisters gathered in the chapel, candlelight painting their faces in gold and shadow. Yet the prayers seemed to echo strangely, as though the air itself refused to carry them heavenward. Sister Mary Agnes wrote, "Our words fall back upon us like stones. I fear we are not heard." One night, as the wind screamed against the walls and the bell tower creaked like a dying tree, the sisters sang hymns that trembled in the air. But Agnes noticed something unsettling in their voices. They did not sound like 20 voices or even 17. She swore she heard others, faint but insistent, joining in harmony from the dark corners of the chapel. The candle flames bent as though pulled by breath that wasn't theirs. On January 21st, Sister Mary Margaret was discovered lying peacefully in her bed. Her account books were stacked neatly at her desk, every figure tallied, every line balanced. A final note rested atop them in her clean, even handwriting. All debts settled. The final accounting awaits. When Dr. Hartwell examined her, he found her body still warm hours after death, no rigor setting in, no pallor. She might have been asleep, but she wasn't. And in the basement, he stumbled upon something no physician was trained to explain. A hidden chamber behind the root cellar wall lit by guttering candles. Inside, 13 wooden crosses stood arranged in a circle. 3 already lay flat upon a stone altar, each bearing the name of a dead sister. 10 remained upright, waiting. And at the center, one bore the name that froze his blood, Mother Superior Catherine Brennan. The doctor backed away, the weight of the cold earth pressing down on him from every direction. His journal for that night held only 3 words, scrawled, in shaking ink, "It is planned." And upstairs in the dormitory the sisters slept, smiling. The shepherd's whispers snow muffled every sound outside Sacred Heart. But within those brick walls, silence had sharpened into something unbearable. It was no longer the quiet of prayer or the peace of contemplation. It was the hush before a scream, the stillness of air before a storm breaks. The sisters moved about their tasks like pale shadows, their eyes heavy-lidded, their lips murmuring to companions who weren't there. Dr. Hartwell, still trapped at the convent by snow too deep for escape, kept his journal close. His physician's hands, so steady with a scalpel, now trembled as they gripped his pen. He could not deny the impossible arrangement of crosses in that secret chamber. He could not ignore the fact that each new death had been foretold in wood and wax before it occurred. But most of all, he could not forget the way Mother Superior Brennan had smiled when confronted about it. "God's will cannot be hidden forever," she had said. It was the way she said it that haunted him, not with defiance but with certainty. The bell tower goes silent. Every night since the convent was founded, the sisters had rung the tower bell at vespers. Its bronze toll rolled across the valley, carrying prayers through the fields to the scattered farms beyond. But after the third death, the bell fell silent. Elizabeth Hoffman, the farmer's wife who lived nearest the convent, noticed first. She told her husband that it was as though Sacred Heart had been swallowed whole by the snow. No light in the windows, no smoke from the chimneys, no bell in the tower. "It is holding its breath," Hans Hoffman muttered grimly, stamping snow from his boots. Inside, the sisters seemed unaware or unwilling to notice. Mary Agnes recorded that Mother Brennan forbade the bell from being rung, saying that God required silence to hear their prayers. Yet Agnes felt differently. In her log she wrote, "It is not silence that fills these halls. It is listening. Something is listening." The voices in the walls Hartwell began to hear them too. At first he dismissed the sounds as wind pressing against the stone, but then he realized the whispers had rhythm, cadence, something like language. At night, when he lay shivering under the convent's coarse blankets, he heard the walls breathing. A low hum threaded through the timbers, sometimes rising like a chant, sometimes slipping into what might have been laughter. On January 22nd, he followed the sound down to the chapel. There, by candlelight, the sisters stood in a circle. Their voices rose in hymns, soft, strangely harmonious, and yet what froze him was that the words did not match any liturgy he knew. He wrote later, "It was prayer, but not to God. They spoke in unison, syllables that were not Latin, not English, not German. It was language I could not identify, though I swear I understood its meaning. It spoke of release, of invitation. In the shadows behind them, he swore he saw movement, forms like women, faces like those already buried, lips moving without sound. When he blinked, the figures were gone." Letters beneath the floorboards. The next morning, Sister Mary Agnes approached him with something clenched tightly in her trembling hands. Scraps of paper, brittle with age. She had found them in a box, hidden beneath the library floorboards. They were letters, not written in the neat script of the convent's records, but in a hand sharp, angular, almost fevered. Each was signed only with the name, the Shepherd. The earliest letters dated back 2 years long before the first death. They spoke of divine purpose, of chosen souls who would serve as bridges. They offered instructions for prayer, fasting, even for how to prepare the mind to receive the call. And always, they emphasized secrecy. The flock will not understand until the moment of gathering. Keep hidden what must be hidden. There, peace will be proof enough. One letter chilled Hartwell more than the others. 13 crosses. 12 will fall, one by one. The final must remain standing until the circle is closed. You will know the hour. You will know the word. The parchment smelled faintly of smoke, as though it had been pressed against flame. A sister's confession. That evening, Hartwell found Sister Magdalene in the refectory, staring at the frost-caked windows as though she could see through them. Her cheeks were flushed with something that was not fever, her eyes unfocused. When he asked her if she was well, she smiled faintly and whispered, "They stand just beyond the glass, all of them. They are waiting." He pressed her. Who was waiting? She turned to him slowly, her expression soft, serene. "Our shepherd," she said. "He speaks to us in dreams. He says the snow will seal the world away until the work is finished. We are nearly complete." When Hartwell demanded to know what she meant, her gaze sharpened with sudden pity. "You are blind, Doctor. You cling to your science as if it were armor, but no steel will save you. The circle closes, with or without your eyes open." The words left him colder than the wind that rattled the shutters. The note on the pillow on January 23rd, Sister Magdalene herself was found dead. Her body lay as all the others had, peaceful, hands clasping her rosary, a faint smile on her lips. But this time there was something new. Clutched in her palm was a slip of paper bearing a single word scrawled in the same angular hand as the shepherd's letters. Soon. The word burned itself into Hartwell's mind. Soon what? Soon for whom? He examined her body again and again, searching for signs of poison, suffocation, anything. But as before, perfect health, no cause of death. The sisters reacted not with grief, but with a strange hush, as if a prophecy had moved one step closer to fulfillment. They did not weep. They did not mourn. They only whispered among themselves, their voices like wind over graves. The crosses move. That night, unable to fight his dread, Hartwell returned to the secret chamber beneath the root cellar. The air there was colder than anywhere else in the convent, so cold his breath hung in clouds. But what stopped him was the altar. The cross bearing Sister Magdalene's name now lay flat beside the others. He had not touched it. No one had. Yet it had moved. The 10 remaining upright crosses seemed to lean inward, as if bending toward the center. At the heart of the circle, the cross for Mother Superior Brennan stood taller than before, the grain of the wood gleaming in the candlelight like living flesh. Hartwell staggered back, his lantern shaking in his grip. The chamber seemed to pulse, the very stones sweating with moisture as though the earth itself was alive. He fled upstairs only to find Mother Brennan waiting in the hall, her face illuminated by the thin light of his lantern. "You shouldn't disturb the flock, Doctor," she said softly. Her eyes gleamed, serene yet terrifying. "The shepherd tends them well." The circle tightens, the snowstorm raged on, blotting out the world beyond the convent walls. By January 24th, the Sisters of Sacred Heart might as well have been the last people alive on earth. The blizzard swallowed sound, light, and distance, until only the convent remained, an island of flickering candlelight adrift in a sea of white. But inside it was not warmth they huddled around. It was something else. Something spreading. Dr. Hartwell's notes from those days grow less clinical, more frantic. His handwriting, usually a precise script, scrawled wildly across the page. "I no longer know if I observe a sickness of the body or a contagion of the mind. Yet the symptoms are consistent. Serenity before death, serenity after, as if the flesh has been convinced to surrender its will." He could not name the disease because it was not one medicine could cure. The change in the chapel, the convent's chapel had once been simple. Wooden pews, whitewashed walls, a modest altar with a brass crucifix at its center. But when Hartwell entered on the night of the 24th, he froze. The crucifix was gone. In its place stood the largest of the wooden crosses from the hidden chamber, hauled up from the basement and planted directly on the altar. The sisters knelt before it, their faces upturned in rapture. Their lips moved in whispers that swelled and receded like waves. The cross seemed too large for the space, its shadow stretching across the pews like grasping fingers. When Hartwell demanded who had brought it there, no one answered. Instead, Mother Brennan raised her head and said in a calm, almost maternal tone, "A shepherd must be honored at the table of his flock." The sisters bowed lower, and their whispers grew louder. Hartwell backed out of the chapel, heart pounding, the sound of their murmured litany chasing him down the corridor. The dead returned that night. Mary Agnes confessed something that turned Hartwell's blood to ice. She claimed she had seen Mary Elizabeth, the second nun to die, walking the hallway outside her cell. Not as a ghost, not as a vision, but as solid as any living woman. She said the dead sister's lips moved in silent prayer. Her feet left, prints in the frost that had crept in beneath the door. Hartwell tried to dismiss it as grief, exhaustion, the tricks of a frightened mind. But then he found them himself. Small bare footprints pressed into the thin layer of ice along the corridor stones. They led straight to the chapel. Inside, the sisters were still gathered, their faces glowing with candlelight. And among them, Hartwell swore he saw her, Mary Elizabeth, kneeling, serene, whispering in unison with the living. When he blinked, the figure was gone. But the prints remained. The hunger in their eyes. By morning, Hartwell noticed the sisters had stopped eating. The bread in the kitchen lay untouched, the porridge congealed in the pot. Yet the women walked with a strange vigor, eyes bright, cheeks flushed with unnatural color. Mary Agnes whispered to him in terror, "They say food is no longer needed, that they are sustained by something else. I see them staring at me, Doctor, staring as if I am the only one still hungry, the only one still bound to earth." He watched them in the refectory. Women who once broke bread with bowed heads now sat in eerie silence, hands folded, eyes fixed on nothing, lips curved in faint smiles. They chewed nothing, yet seemed nourished by their stillness. Hartwell's pen scrawled in panic, "Their hunger is not for bread." The dream in the infirmary sleep became dangerous. Hartwell discovered this when he collapsed from exhaustion in the infirmary and dreamed for the first time since the deaths began. He dreamed of the hidden chamber, but it was no longer beneath the convent. It stretched endlessly, its walls lined with crosses, thousands of them, each bearing a name. He recognized some: Mary Catherine, Mary Margaret, Mary Magdalene. But most were unknown, carved in scripts from languages he could not place. In the A dream, the shepherd stood at the center, a tall, faceless figure, his hands outstretched. Around him the dead sisters sang in voices that shook the earth. Their hymn rose into a single command that split Hartwell's mind like thunder: join. He awoke gasping, his body drenched in cold sweat, his ears still ringing. And on the floor beside his cot lay a slip of parchment, though no one had entered. The infirmary. It bore one word in that same jagged hand: now. The frozen bell on. The morning of the 25th, Hartwell ventured into the bell tower, hoping to prove that at least one corner of the convent remained untouched. He climbed the ladder, his breath steaming in the icy air, until he reached the great bronze bell. But when he touched it, his hand recoiled. The metal was frozen solid, rimed in a thick crust of ice, though no snow had seeped through. The clapper within was coated as well, fused in place, unable to swing. And carved into the ice itself, as if etched by a hand that moved through frost instead of ink, was a message: one remains. Hartwell staggered back down the ladder, nearly falling in his haste. But when he burst into the corridor, Mother Brennan was waiting again. Her eyes gleamed with something between pity and triumph. "Do you see now, Doctor?" she whispered. "The shepherd counts his flock. Only one more. Lamb must be gathered." Her gaze shifted past him, to Sister Mary Agnes, pale and trembling at the end of the hall. The circle closes. That night, Hartwell forced himself back into the hidden chamber. The air was thicker than ever, heavy with dampness and the faint coppery tang of blood, though no wound had been shed. He raised his lantern and saw that the crosses had moved again. 8 now lay flat across the altar, their names burned deep into the wood. Only 5 stood upright, each seeming to lean forward as though eager to fall, and in the center, the cross bearing Mary Agnes's name now glowed faintly, a shimmer in the grain-like veins of fire beneath bark. Hartwell dropped the lantern in shock, barely catching it before the flame touched the floor. His breath came ragged, his journal sliding from his pocket. When he scrambled to pick it up, he found a message, scrawled inside in handwriting that was not his own. "You cannot save her." The ink was still wet. The final vigil the convent no longer slept. By the night of January 25th, the building pulsed with a strange rhythm, as though the walls themselves breathed in unison with the sisters. Hartwell roamed the corridors with his lantern, yet he was not alone. Even when no footsteps echoed behind him, he felt the press of eyes in the dark, the brush of breath on his neck. The sisters had abandoned their cells entirely. They now slept, if they slept at all, gathered in the chapel on the cold stone floor, their bodies aligned in a perfect circle around the altar. When Hartwell asked why, Mother Brennan answered with a serene smile: "We keep vigil for the last of us. The circle must hold." Her gaze flicked toward Mary Agnes, who shivered in silence at the chapel's edge. Agnes's desperation. Mary Agnes was no longer the careful recorder she had once been. Her journal pages had turned frantic, blotched with ink and smears of what looked like tears. She clutched them constantly, as though the act of writing kept her tethered to reality. She confided to Hartwell in a whisper: "They watch me now. Not just the living, but the dead. I see Mary Catherine in the corridors, smiling as though she waits for me. When I close my eyes, I hear them calling my name, softly, sweetly, as if I were a child being beckoned home. Doctor, I do not want to go, but I fear I cannot refuse." Her hands trembled so violently that Hartwell grasped them in his own. He promised he would protect her, but the words rang hollow even in his ears. How could he protect her from something he could not even name? The feast of nothing on. The evening of the 26th, Hartwell entered the refectory to find the sisters gathered at the long wooden table. Platters of bread, bowls of broth, and pitchers of water were set before them, but none of it had been prepared by human hands. The food was ice-cold, untouched, yet the sisters lifted invisible morsels to their mouths, chewing and swallowing with blissful smiles. Their plates remained empty, their cups unfilled, yet their eyes gleamed as if they feasted on a banquet unseen. Agnes clung to Hartwell's arm, her voice trembling. They believe they are already in heaven. They eat nothing, yet they say they are full. They drink nothing, yet they say they are quenched. Doctor, what happens when the body forgets the need for life? Hartwell could only watch as Mother Brennan raised her empty goblet and intoned, "The shepherd provides." The sisters echoed her words in unison, their voices like wind moaning through hollow trees. The second chamber Hartwell's dread deepened when Agnes led him to another discovery. Beneath the floorboards of the convent library, hidden under a loose plank, they found a second chamber. Smaller than the first, it held not crosses but books, hand-copied manuscripts in the same jagged hand as the shepherd's letters. The texts were filled with prayers Hartwell did not recognize, invocations, that mixed scripture with words from no known language. One passage chilled him most. "When 12 have crossed, the 13th will stand as gate. The circle will close, the flock will pass, and the shepherd will arrive in flesh." Hartwell's pulse hammered in his throat. This was no abstract ritual. It was preparation for an arrival. Something, or someone, intended to step through whatever doorway these deaths had carved open. Agnes whispered, "It is me. I am the gate." The dead in the chapel. That night, Hartwell's worst fear materialized. Entering the chapel, he found the sisters arrayed once more in their circle, but this time they were not alone. The dead had returned. Mary Catherine, Mary Elizabeth, Mary Margaret, every sister who had fallen lay among the living, bodies whole, faces luminous with otherworldly calm. They knelt beside their companions, their hands folded, their lips moving in prayer. Hartwell's mind rebelled. These could not be corpses, yet their presence radiated cold, a chill that reached into his marrow. Their eyes opened, and every gaze turned toward him. Mother Brennan rose, her face shining in the candlelight. "Do you see now, Doctor? Death is not the end. The circle holds. The flock gathers. Soon the shepherd will walk among us." Hartwell stumbled backward, clutching his chest. But when he glanced at Agnes, he saw her transfixed, her lips trembling with words she could not stop. She was whispering the same prayer as the others. The attempted escape panic drove Hartwell to action. That night, while the sisters slept in their circle, he seized Agnes by the hand and dragged her through the snow-choked corridors toward the convent's side door. He flung it open and was met with a wall of white, snow piled 6 feet high, blocking the exit entirely. The blizzard had sealed them in like a tomb. Agnes collapsed in the doorway, sobbing. "There is no escape. He has shut us in until it is finished." Hartwell tried to dig with his bare hands, clawing at the ice, but the snow was hard-packed, unyielding. His fingers bled against it. Behind them in the corridor, a voice rose. A woman's voice, serene, commanding. "Come back to the circle." It was Mother Brennan. When Hartwell turned, he saw not only her, but the rest of the sisters standing in the hall, living and dead, alike. Their faces glowed faintly in the lantern light, their eyes fixed on him and Agnes. "Come back," they whispered together. "The circle waits." The lantern shatters. Hartwell hurled the lantern at the floor in desperation. The glass shattered, flames flaring across the frozen stone. For an instant, the sisters recoiled, shadows writhing across the walls. Hartwell seized Agnes and fled into the convent's depths, the only place he knew they could hide, the hidden chamber. But when they descended into its icy maw, he realized too late that he had run into the shepherd's arms. The chamber had changed again. Every upright cross now glowed faintly in the dark. All but one had fallen, their names seared into the altar. Only 2 remained standing. Catherine, Brennan, and Mary Agnes. Hartwell's heart lurched. As he stared, a sound rose from the stone itself, a low, resonant hum like a horn blown from beneath the earth. The air thickened, pressing against his lungs until he gasped for breath. And in the center of the chamber, something began to take shape. Not shadow, not light. Something in between. Something that bent the air around it like heat rising from a black road. Agnes dropped to her knees, her voice breaking into sobs. He is coming. The shepherd's arrival, the chamber throbbed with sound. It was not music nor chant, but something deeper, the low vibration of stone itself groaning under weight it was never meant to bear. Hartwell staggered, clutching the walls, his lantern flickering wildly in his grip. The air pressed against him like a living hand, thick and wet, making every breath a struggle. At the altar, the fallen crosses glowed faintly. Their names seemed to writhe in the wood as if the letters themselves were alive. Only two remained upright, Catherine Brennan and Mary Agnes, and their shadows leaned unnaturally long across the chamber floor. Agnes knelt, trembling. "He's here," she whispered, her eyes wide with both terror and awe. "The shepherd has come to gather us." Hartwell wanted to shout at her, shake her, drag her back into reason, but his throat constricted. The words would not come, because something was forming. The shape in the air, at first it was distortion, like heat wavering over summer fields. Then it grew darker, denser, until the air itself seemed to sag beneath its weight. A figure emerged, not fully flesh, not fully shadow, but something liminal. Its height nearly brushed the chamber ceiling, its body robed in rippling folds that bled into the dark. But its face, God, its face was no face at all. Where features should have been was only a smooth, blank expanse, and yet Hartwell felt it watching him with unbearable intensity. He thought of a lamb staring up at the butcher's knife. The sisters behind him began to sing. Their voices rose in eerie harmony, words in no human tongue, yet Hartwell's heart understood their meaning. Welcome. The shepherd tends his flock. Brennan's devotion, Mother Superior. Catherine Brennan stepped forward, her veil falling back from her silvered hair. Her eyes glistened with rapture. She stretched her hands toward the figure, her voice steady, exultant. We are ready. Gather us. Complete us. The figure inclined, or perhaps the chamber tilted. Hartwell could not tell. Its faceless gaze fell upon her, and her body shuddered as though touched by unseen hands. Slowly, reverently, she lowered herself onto the altar, lying across the fallen crosses as if upon a bier. The sisters' hymn swelled. Candles guttered and surged, their flames stretching toward the blank-faced figure like supplicants. Hartwell tried to move, but his legs refused. He felt as though the very marrow in his bones was frozen. Only his mind screamed, "This is not divine. This is manipulation. This is murder, cloaked in ritual." But his body would not obey. Agnes, torn between Agnes, crawled forward on her knees, tears streaming down her face. She pressed her palms to the stone, her voice breaking between sobs and song. "I don't want to go," she whispered. "But I hear them. They tell me there is peace. They tell me the world beyond is more real than this one. Doctor, how do I refuse when my sisters wait for me?" Hartwell forced his limbs into motion, seizing her shoulders. "Because it's a lie," he rasped. "You're alive, Agnes, that is enough. Whatever you see, whatever you hear, it is poison dressed as faith. If you go to them, you'll never come back." Her eyes flicked to him, full of anguish. Then, past him, to the faceless shepherd, whose form pulsed brighter, stronger with every word of the sisters' hymn. The sacrifice, on the altar, Catherine Brennan gasped once, then exhaled with a smile that froze Hartwell's blood. Her body went still. The cross bearing her name toppled from upright to prone, clattering against the stone with a sound like thunder, and the shepherd grew more solid. Its robes rippled with substance now, casting shadows, its limbs elongating until they nearly brushed the walls. The chamber's ceiling dripped with condensation, water beating and falling like tears. The hymn broke into ecstatic wails. Sisters fell prostrate, their bodies racked with tremors of joy. Hartwell clung to Agnes, but she shook with the same tremors, as though the sound itself pulled her apart. When she opened her mouth again, her voice was not her own. Only one remains. The confrontation, Hartwell's fury broke free. He tore himself from Agnes and lunged toward the altar, seizing one of the fallen crosses. He lifted it high, brandishing it at the shepherd's shifting form. "Leave them!" he shouted, though his voice cracked. "You've stolen their faith, twisted their minds, but you will not take her." The shepherd tilted its faceless head, almost curious. For an instant, silence fell. Then Hartwell felt it. Not touch, not words, thought. Weight pressed into his skull, colder than the deepest winter, whispering directly into his mind. "You do not believe, but you will." The pressure grew unbearable. He dropped the cross, clutching his head, collapsing to his knees. His vision fractured into light and shadow. He saw the sisters not as women but as lambs, bleating, pressing against one another, desperate for the shepherd's call. He saw Agnes glowing faintly, her body a door waiting to be opened, and he saw himself, not as a doctor, not as a man, but as a witness. Nothing more. The circle seals. The shepherd stretched one elongated hand toward Agnes. She rose without hesitation, as if pulled by strings. Her face glowed with ecstasy, lips murmuring prayers even as tears rolled down her cheeks. Hartwell tried to stand, tried to grab her, but his limbs refused. His body belonged to gravity, to cold, to despair. He could only watch as she reached the altar. The last cross quivered in the stone, the one bearing Mary Agnes's name. Its base trembled, tilting, leaning toward the prone bodies of the others. When it fell, the circle would be complete. The last lamb, the chamber pulsed like a heart. Candles guttered in waves, shadows dancing as though the stone walls themselves had veins. The shepherd's faceless head bent low over the altar, where the body of Catherine Brennan lay serene and lifeless. Its formless hand hovered above Mary Agnes, who trembled yet did not pull away. Hartwell clawed at the floor, dragging himself forward. His body felt heavier with every breath, as though invisible hands pressed him down. He forced air into his lungs, his voice scraping from his throat. "Agnes, don't let them take you." She looked at him then, her tear-streaked face torn between terror and bliss. "But they're waiting for me," she whispered. "They say I am the last, that once I cross we'll all be whole." Her words echoed in the chamber, not as sound, but as truth. The final cross shook. The breaking point, Hartwell hurled himself upward, staggering toward the altar. He seized Agnes's wrist, gripping her as though sheer strength could anchor her to life. "You are alive," he growled. "Do you hear me? Alive, and that is enough. Whatever they promise, whatever they whisper, it is a lie." Agnes's gaze locked on his, her eyes wide, pupils trembling. For one heartbeat she seemed to waver. Then her lips parted, and in a voice both hers and not hers, she said, "You cannot stop the circle. You are part of it too." Hartwell froze. The shepherd's faceless head turned toward him and he felt it. A pressure in his skull, a realization pressing into his mind like a hot brand. He was not just witness. He was the 13th. The doctor's revelation, it struck him all at once, the notes, the dreams, the words etched in frost and parchment. One remains. One remains. It had never been Agnes alone. The ritual required a skeptic, an outsider, someone to see and carry the story beyond the convent's walls, someone to bear witness and ensure the shepherd's work would not end here. Agnes was the gate, but he was the voice. Hartwell's stomach turned to ice. He realized that all his frantic note-taking, all his careful documentation had been not resistance but participation. The shepherd did not need his faith. It only needed his record. The chamber shook with laughter, though no mouths moved. Agnes's Smile. Agnes reached for him with trembling hands, no longer resisting. Her expression softened into the same serene smile that had marked every death before hers. Don't be afraid, she said gently. They say you will remember us. You will tell the world. That is your purpose. Before Hartwell could stop she lay down upon the altar beside Brennan. Her breath slowed, her eyes closed, and her lips curved into peace. The final cross toppled. The chamber roared like a collapsing cathedral. Light surged from the altar, so bright it seared Hartwell's eyes. The sisters, living and dead, rose in unison, their forms dissolving into the brilliance. Their hymn swelled to a deafening crescendo that rattled his bones. Then silence. When Hartwell opened his eyes, the chamber was empty. Every cross lay prone, every candle snuffed. Only he remained, kneeling on the frozen stone. The aftermath. 3 days later, when the snow finally relented, Hartwell stumbled into Millbrook, wild-eyed and frostbitten, clutching his journal. He told the authorities the sisters had perished in a sudden illness. Their bodies were buried in a mass grave behind Sacred Heart, the convent sealed under order of the church. But his private journal told the truth. Pages upon pages of meticulous detail, ending with the words, "I was chosen, I am the 13th. He never practiced medicine again. When he died in 1867, those journals were found among his belongings and quietly locked away. The twist. But here is the part history often omits. Among Hartwell's papers was a final letter, dated only weeks before his death. His handwriting by then had grown shaky, uneven, but the words burned with conviction. The shepherd has not abandoned me. I hear them at night, just beyond the veil. They whisper that the work is not finished. I see the circle in my dreams, ever widening. I know now that my role was never to resist but to remember, to carry the truth forward, to prepare new flocks. Beneath his signature was a symbol, not words but a jagged mark, the same angular script as the shepherd's letters, and in the margins, in a hand not his own, one final word had been scrawled: continue. Sacred. Hart was torn down in 1873. Farmers who bought the land reported nothing unusual, except that animals refused to graze where the convent once stood. Locals whispered of strange lights in the cemetery at night, of women's voices singing hymns in no known tongue. But perhaps the most chilling part is this. Across the country, scattered through archives and libraries, researchers have uncovered letters, journals, and testimonies written in the same angular script, some from monasteries, some from missions, some from congregations that vanished entirely. Each contains a single, repeated phrase: the shepherd tends his flock. And always, at the end, continue.